Hi everyone, my name is James Feeney. Welcome to or back to my channel. Today I'm here with a VR to the lovely Whiskey Stevens. The hashtag is #Tarot Snapshot, I believe. This was a video that Whiskey very bravely and boldly uploaded where she went through her tarot collection and the decks that she had acquired and used them to tell the story of her life and her experience with the cards as a collector, and incorporated various elements of other storytelling about herself. And to me, that felt very, it took, I think, a lot of strength and bravery to be that vulnerable on camera. And I respect her and admire her so much for that. And I was completely wrapped. And she had mentioned that she was looking for others in the community to respond. I know she tagged me on Instagram when she posted it, and she said that she was maybe hoping to get to know a little bit more about me as well. And I found that really sweet and flattering, and I'm always looking to get to know others in the community as well. I also watched Lennan Smith's, I'll link both of these videos down below, the original by Whiskey and Lennon's response. Both of them were so powerful and impactful and profound. I listened, I just stared at the screen. I never paused it, I never anything. From start to finish, I was completely wrapped. And I thought I would do, of course, a response of my own. I'm not sure how deep and profound mine will be. I will say and start by saying that I feel very lucky. I have not faced too many major hardships in comparison to others in my life, and I feel very fortunate for that. And I'm not really sure exactly how that will be reflected through these tarot deck acquisitions. Likewise, this is not, of course, all of the decks that I have. I am a collector, and I do have a decent amount of decks. I would say I have a lot of decks, and that's actually something I'm working on. I'm not happy having a lot of decks right now, and I'm in the process of purging and getting rid of, I would say, at least half, if not more, of my decks. For me, and this is not to say that anybody who collects or anybody who has a lot of decks that I am being critical or anything. I think some people do, and it's wonderful, and they are happy, and they enjoy it, and good for you. For me, not so much. It felt just very unhealthy. I was not doing it for the right reasons. It was more of a coping mechanism, and actually the amount of decks I had was making me extremely anxious, and it just wasn't helping my quality of life or my existence at all. And I like to think of myself, I don't mind being called a collector. I think I'm a collector who wants a very finite and small curated collection of decks that I feel very strongly about and that I use very regularly. If I have a deck that I don't feel called to use very often, or I'm just keeping for some reason, to me, that starts to weigh heavily on me, and I don't do well with that. So these are decks to me that were pivotal in my journey. I don't have a journey that spans as many years, I think, as Whiskey and Lennan, both of them, their journey started when they were quite young. And yes, so theirs has just been more long-spanning than mine. So without further ado and all that prefacing and qualifying, we'll get right into it. So starting with my very first deck, which I actually do still have. I mentioned this in my, the tarot collector tag I did. It was a VR to Moon Baby recently, so I'll link that. But I talk about this deck a bit in that one. This is my first Rider-Waite Smith. It was from the yellow box. It's not anything special, just the plaid back. I got it now a little over 6 years ago, I think. So that's really where my tarot journey began. I would say when I was young, I do recall memories of tarot and divination, especially at my aunt's house. My aunt actually would babysit me and my sister on most days because my parents worked quite full-time, and she worked often from home, and there was more people in the house, like my two older cousins, so we would go to their house. And my aunt was and is very interested in magic, divination. I remember, and I know that her house was just full of crystals. She had tarot decks. She was always speaking in very spiritual terms, and that was very much her lifestyle, or is her lifestyle. And so I was surrounded by that growing up. I didn't get my first deck until I purchased it on my own right when I began college in so I was about 18 or so, but I did dabble in the cards and see her use them, and got to touch crystals and play drums, and she would show me all of these things. And I've always been interested in that kind of stuff ever since I was very little. And I did have a few weird experiences in my life that kind of made me feel very fearful of tarot decks. I was raised Roman Catholic, but my parents and my family is very accepting and open to different beliefs. So I've never been castigated or judged or felt like I couldn't be expressive about what I like and my beliefs. It's nice to have that around, and I know that I'm very fortunate for that. So that's really, I would say, where my tarot journey began. Now that I think about it, is with that aunt when I was quite young, for the better part of a decade, being babysat by her and being around her metaphysical tools and hearing her speak about it in passing, but never really sitting down and caring to ask so much more. I guess I kind of felt like I was outside of it, or felt weird asking. So there's that. Now, the first actual tarot deck, this plaid back tarot deck from the yellow box. I had just gotten to college. College for me was I'm not so far out of college, only a few years, but it was an important time for me. I went to school in the city, New York City, and I don't live terribly outside of the city now. I live about a little bit more than an hour south of the city, right on the beach. That's where I grew up. But being in the city, there was a lot going on. It's a very fast-paced environment, even if you are just going to school and focusing on that. There's just so much going on. So I felt overwhelmed. It was really causing me to question my identity. I know the turnover rate at my school was quite high, and it mostly had to do with people partying in the city or encountering bad situations, or of course there's financial things. It's not cheap to live in the city or exist in the city. So for one thing or another, it's not a traditional college campus. I basically just lived on a city block. And I walked out the door, and it was just stores and buildings, and it was just a lot of hustle and bustle. So I felt overwhelmed, and so that made me, I think, turn to spirituality more. I had throughout my entire life, but as I said, I had weird experiences growing up that made me feel very fearful of spirituality and I would think things I thought would befall me if I were to allow myself that freedom, or to allow myself a dive into that way. I think it had to do with conditioning, among other things. But eventually I went to a metaphysical shop in the city. There are plenty of them. The one I went to is called Enchantments. It's on the Lower East Side, and it's on this sort of street that's actually quite mystical seeming. There's like an herbal shop and a vintage toy store, and it's just the whole street that this is on if anybody knows New York or like Manhattan, there's this, like Astor Place kind of area, St. Mark's Place, that area, which is known for being kind of more metaphysical and strange happenings. So I went into the shop. I know they're known for their candles. I actually didn't go in looking for a tarot deck. I went in looking for a book on magic, my first book on magic, and maybe to get a few basic supplies to just do things at home. And I saw this in the glass case and was like, I think I would like that. I don't know why. I just think I would like that. And so I picked it up, and I got my first book, which is, do I have it around to show? I'm actually going to go grab it because I have the first book. So this was the first book I bought. I bought these both at the same time for, I would say, the better part of 4 years. All I did was use this deck. I didn't go online ever. To me, something in my head said that online equaled, I don't know. I thought, okay, books are more reliable. Online sources might be fake or not as substantial. And so I was like, I'm just going to read books. So for the first at least 2 years, I actually only used this book, and I could probably recite every line in this book. I would sit in my dorm, I'd do readings for myself, and then I would be like, to my friends and on the floor, I'd be like, you guys want tarot readings? Or they'd come and knock, and we would light candles and do tarot readings. And sometimes after a night out, as college goes, we would come back and do tarot, flip tarot cards. And at first I would read from the book, and over time I really memorized them, and I would just sit there and I would hold it. I would out loud say as much as I could about the card, look it up in the book, see if I missed anything or what have you. And over time, I memorized it, and then I was able to sort of put the book down and then come up with my own meanings and offer readings that were a little bit more, better. So this to me was just so pivotal, so crucial in my journey. And I never really knew there were more tarot decks out there also for the majority of my practice. And that book to me is still if there were a beginner I would give them this book, just because it's something that helped me and was so crucial for me, and it wasn't intimidating. And throughout my college life, for the most part, this is the only deck I used, and it saw me through a lot of tough times, actually. I would carry it around sometimes on days where I had big decisions, where I felt stressed. I'd say I did a lot of my kind of like soul searching and finding of myself in college, and there were very low moments, especially towards the end of college, which I've mentioned a little bit like, I think I have a video about like hard times as a means of like spiritual impetus or something. And at that point, I was using the cards even more. I was flipping them. I just always wanted them close. It felt like I had someone to talk to. I felt like I had like a very accurate mirror. It made me feel like I could always consult something with any questions or insecurities and things I just didn't feel comfortable talking about with other people. So I would turn to the cards. And yeah, during those times, I just didn't feel comfortable talking to even the people I was closest to, because I didn't feel comfortable myself in who I was and all of that. So yeah, and then I think that this also has, and I haven't really talked about this on my channel much, but coming out in terms of sexuality and things like that, I was very in the closet. That was something that scared me. I didn't like talking about it. I didn't like even thinking about it, my sexual orientation and such. And the cards kind of coincided with a thing that I could turn to. I never had turned to anybody until midway through my college time, or spoken about it out loud at all. And the cards were kind of there for me during that. So during these big aspects of my life where I was becoming who I am, where I was facing some of the hardest things that I have as of yet, and just kind of feeling broken down, the cards were there. I am somebody who is a little bit more introverted and introspective. I have a lot of friends, I would say. Well, I wouldn't say I have a lot of friends. I have a close circle of friends, and I think I have more friends than I think I do. I am a Sagittarius, but I'm also really known for going off the grid for sometimes weeks or months. And I know that I have people around me that care a lot and sometimes get concerned. And I know that the tarot at that time especially was just so helpful for me in sort of finding a balance of keeping and maintaining and fostering connections with people I really care about, but also seeing to myself and reaching a place where I felt comfortable with myself in order to better the relationship with those people. And so this was so important for me. And this is honestly the majority of the tarot journey. This deck, even in terms of chronology and timeline, this takes up the most of it. So there's that. The next deck I even got at all was toward the end of college, and it is I keep it in this bag. It's the Wildwood. This is the exact copy, which I edged in this sort of plum berry color, which I regret to some degree because it bled over onto the fronts, but I'm okay with that. And this is when I was getting more serious in tarot, where I thought, okay, maybe I want to do this or offer readings sometimes for money. At that point, I'd been practicing for a while and was doing more readings on acquaintances. I was living on my own at the time, and my friends would just sometimes come over for readings. So I looked online and I was like, I wonder if there's like other imagery out there, just things I should know. And so I stumbled upon this deck on Amazon, and I was starting to realize there were a lot of decks out there. This one looked very interesting. I live in America, I was born here, but my heritage is from Ireland, and so I did associate spiritually to more of the Celtic sort of paths out there. So I felt very drawn to this, and it made me realize that there was more than just one, the Rider-Waite-Smith, because this system does deviate a bit, and it corresponds to the Wheel of the Year. I enjoyed the artwork. It gave me something that was challenging and threw something new into my sphere. And I remember at that time I was meditating and journeying a lot and going through a tough time. And this imagery I connected to a lot more than the Rider-Waite-Smith. So I could turn to this for answers and reflect on some of these harder times and the learning I was doing through journeying and astral travel while I was living alone. And so yeah, this was pretty pivotal for me. And this is where I started to become a collector. This is where I started to read more for others in a way that was more professional. This is where I started to resonate more with spirituality through imagery. This is where a lot of those things just started to happen. It was quite the process. And this is also where I started to find the online community and watch spiritual practitioners, tarot tube, all of that. This is where this all began. And because it kind of one thing led to another. If I was willing to research decks and things I ought to know online about tarot reading as somebody who wanted to progress, I then turned to YouTube and came across TarotTube, and that was quite the rabbit hole. I spent a lot of time actually just being an observer, never even commenting, and then it took quite some time for me to get up the courage to make videos at all, just because a lot of the issues I was facing had to do with appearance and selfhood and the idea of being a person in a body and not liking what I was kind of given, or it's a whole thing. I was just very insecure. And so for me, when I did start to make videos at not too much longer after this, when I did start to do that, for me, it was such like an act of boldness and bravery. I was pushing myself so hard to do that. It was made me so uncomfortable, but I knew that it would just be so beneficial if I could get myself to a good place with feeling fine, being seen, regardless of how I looked, being seen. That's something that I just didn't want. I would spend so many days calling out of work, not going to class, like kind of riding the edge of what I could do in terms of absences at work and class. I had a job, I had an internship, and I had class, and I was living alone, so I was like self-isolating, and there would just be days where I just like laid in bed and cried, and maybe the most I did was like flip a card over. So that sounds really awful. Maybe it sounds dramatic. It sounds dramatic to me. Maybe I'm just kind of downplaying it, but yeah, this was there for me. This was so important to me at that time. And so, yeah, I can't ever imagine getting rid of this, even if I don't work with it as much now. So, and there are times when I return to it. So there's that. The next one that kind of signified something in my practice going forward was the Pagan Otherworlds. And this is when I kind of discovered that there were these like independently produced decks, that there was like all these cool art styles out there. And this wasn't too long after the Wildwood, but this was a deck I got, and I knew at that point that I had started my sort of like tarot page on Instagram, and I was offering readings at the time, and I was like, this is going to be the deck that I want to read for in terms of clients. And so I picked it up with that in mind, and in the very beginning, this was pretty much the only deck I used on clients. And so this to me feels like the beginning of my tarot career as a reader, and I still love this deck. I still use it a decent amount, and it will always hold a place in my heart. I think that this was like when I was starting to find myself and see like that there was more to me than just my surface, and that I had interests and that I could do things, and this was something I felt confident in, something I felt like I could really do and pursue. And for me, it was just, yeah, this deck symbolizes all of that to me. So this is almost like a deck of personal power in a way, or reclaiming my power. And yeah, I can't help but smile when I pick this up and think about those times. So this was a big foundational deck for me. Not too much else to say on it. This was also more toward the end of me living alone, the end of college, about to move home, being uncertain about what I was going to do in terms of work and career moving forward. And this was just there for all of that. And I really wanted to explore the idea of a career that was non-traditional. I couldn't really envision myself in any of the fields that kind of related to my education. So yeah, this was there. This was there for me when I moved home, and was sad for quite some time. It felt like I was kind of regressing, or I just felt kind of, I don't know. I felt like working up to living on my own in the city and trying to work there was me climbing, was me advancing in some way, and to move home to me then at that point felt like, yeah, like I had lost in some way, like I am taking steps back. And I soon realized that that wasn't the case at all. And if I had stayed, I would have probably forced myself to get a job that was very rigorous and didn't leave much time for me to investigate what it is that I wanted. So I'd be much more content living somewhere that has a lot less hustle and bustle and all of that, and have a lower cost of living, and then explore things I'm interested in and really have time for myself and do what it is that I care about. And so this deck was there for all of that. Now, the next deck that would come into this factor or place would be the White Sage Tarot, which I don't have out, and I'm actually getting rid of that deck, but it does play a pretty big role in my tarot journey, so I'll just speak to it. So I acquired the White Sage Tarot right about the time when I started reading in a shop. So at that point, I'd been reading via just like in person and Skype and online type means, but I hadn't ever done anything like in a shop or an event or anything like that. And I remember I had the White Sage Tarot. I went to a shop, the shop that I still read at, and asked about potentially reading there, and the owner was so nice, and she, as a sort of interview, had me do a reading for her, and I used the White Sage Tarot then, and I just remember feeling like I could do this, and I was like, yeah, you can do this, James. I don't know why I had any doubts going in, and I was really proud of the reading I gave. I like to think that I'm somewhat self-aware, so when I do a reading for someone, I can tell if it went well or not, regardless of what the person says. I'm like, okay, I think I gave them a good reading. You know what I mean? And it was one of those times where I was really getting into the swing and felt like I was consistently giving quality and good readings. And the owner was really happy with the reading, and then gave me a day of the week that I could have to be in the shop and kind of be a part of the team. And I know starting out, that was a deck that I always brought in the beginning, and I would do chakra readings with it because the White Sage Tarot is quite colorful. It is a pip deck, and I would use the color correspondences, and I was reading about chakras and incorporating a lot of correspondences into my practice at that point. And color correspondence and chakras were very big for me then. They still are. I still incorporate them, but at the time that was like the ultimate for me. And one of the biggest spreads I did, or one of the ones that I would constantly be doing, was the Chakra Spread, and I would always use the White Sage Tarot. And I just associate it with the very beginnings of me being able to read in a shop, and it felt like a new chapter, a next step, and it segued into me doing events to actually having a web presence with a website and all of that. And so for me, the White Sage Tarot was very pivotal in my professional tarot practice, and also as a student of tarot, learning about correspondences and incorporating things just outside of the core meanings. I was taking the time to learn about different spiritual paths and elements that I could then incorporate and use. And so my spiritual life was kind of expanding as well. I was starting to feel better about living where I do, coming home, feeling it as less of a loss and more as a gain. And to me, that was really special. So the White Sage Tarot will always have a special place for me, although I don't have it anymore, or at least it's in a box that is going the way of just leaving. So that was a big one. The next one I have, there's not too many left, really is the Thoth Tarot. So I brought out, well, there's kind of like 3 Thoth Tarots, and they kind of all have different things to speak of in terms of my practice. Now, the Thoth Tarot for me symbolizes finding the deck that's perfect for me. Now, I'm not sure how I feel about the idea of a soul deck. I know that that's something that's kind of a touchy topic and controversial. I don't think that any of us have one deck that we're meant to find, and I really like Mary Grace Farron's video on it, and I think who else has spoken about it that I really enjoyed hearing? Katie Flowers, and I think Natalia from Ouroboros. But yeah, the idea of consuming just because we think we're going to find what we want inside in something else and all that, yeah, no, I'm totally in agreement with that. We are usually trying to fill a void. So, well, not usually, well, at least for me, I was. But the Thoth is like where I kind of landed, and I was like, this could just be it. Like when I got this deck and I really learned how to use it and everything, I was like, this is it. Like if I just had a deck, I would be content with just this. And up until that point, I didn't feel that way. I felt kind of shaky. I was like, I like the idea of tarot, of doing readings, but I don't feel very connected to the actual cards. I don't feel like, you know what I mean? There wasn't a deck where I'm like, I just need to use that deck. Like, that's it. And then the Thoth came along and that happened. And it turned me into like a mega nerd and student. Up until that point, I was reading a lot of tarot books, but afterwards I was just voracious. I was consuming. I couldn't read enough. I couldn't read fast enough. I almost felt like I was like, I need more hours in the day. I need to read faster. I need to know more. I need to learn more. I need to like know this, like my own mind. And so this was, I think, my first copy, the larger edition. Yeah, my first larger edition copy, and then eventually got trimmed. I have a video of me trimming it, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. But yeah, this is the one I mostly use for clients now. Almost all of my readings for clients are going to be with the Thoth deck. That is something I don't ever see changing. So for me, this was like, you found your stability, your solid ground as a reader for yourself and others. This is your place. This is where you belong. With this system and through this system, you can understand yourself and others, and your role as a reader can develop to much broader places than it probably would have otherwise. And so when I found this and it clicked, it was such an aha moment. It was such a breakthrough for me. It was like I could just, it's almost like when there's so much in front of you and you just don't realize, and then you see it and it's like your whole world changes. To me, this was world changing for me as a reader. Yeah, I don't know what else to even say about it in terms of that. And then as a collector, I guess I'm just bringing out the vintage greenie that I have, the one I always show that is, I have a few greenies. This is the one that's water damaged that I use and don't care as much about kind of bringing around because it already is damaged. For me, this is significant in terms of me being interested in tarot history. So deciding to try to acquire decks for their historical value, for their, like, I'm really into vintage decks and I like to learn about the history of tarot and divination. And so this is kind of symbolic of that. Also, the idea of it being kind of imperfect, I think is helpful for me. I am in some ways a perfectionist. I'm very concerned with sometimes the aesthetics of something when I don't think I ought to be. And this kind of gave me a little nudge to say, like, you know, wake up call, check in on yourself where that's concerned. So not as much to say on this one, but it's just more symbolic of my journey with the Thoth, with my journey on the idea of overcoming surface level things. I don't really like small talk. I don't like the idea that a lot of what our lives are comprised of is surface level ideals and beliefs and things, and that we are pushed so heavily into endeavors and a life of things that are just not very meaningful, or they don't really feed who anybody is in the world, and that bothers me. And it's weird that I connected to this deck, but I've always felt that way. I will get up on my soapbox. I can become quite impassioned speaking about society and humanity and existence and values and capitalism and so many other things. I'd probably sound like a lunatic, but yeah, this deck, I just connect to that. And there are times where I find it's just so easy to get back into this more materialistic way of living that ignores the deeper aspects, that going for and falling into small talk and surface level things, or being drawn and feeling an alluring sort of sense toward values and lifestyles that are predicated on those sorts of things. And I do make conscious efforts to kind of keep myself aware and self-reflective and introspective, so that way I can hopefully lead a life that I find personally fulfilling. Yeah, so there's all of that. And then coming up very close to the present, most of these decks are just symbolic of various things, rather than the deck itself being, you know what I mean? It's more of a symbolic thing. So this one is just the Finnish Thoth that Hanny from Fierce and Pretty sent to me. I absolutely love it. It's beautiful. It's stunning. Now, the reason I brought this up, and she sent it with this bag. I've shown this a few times recently. To me, this is very symbolic of being a part of a community. So most of my friends in real life they're very receptive and open to spiritual concepts of exploring like theology and religion, and hearing me speak about tarot and those sorts of interests, and just living life, but living a life that is very much in connection to those sorts of things. But they themselves are not as interested personally in those subjects. And this deck to me is symbolic of finding a community online, of finding friends and people that I resonate with, and feeling like I have a place where I belong. So rather than just making videos and feeling like I'm speaking into a void, I now feel like I have a network. I have friends that are really interesting, that I view as both friends and colleagues, and they're so amazing. There are so many amazing people in this community. I'm making this VR to Whiskey Stevens, an amazing person in this community. I watched Lennan's response to this, another person I would count as a friend and an amazing person in this community. And this deck to me is symbolic of just the true aspects of friendship that I feel toward these people. I feel a sense of caring and belonging amongst them, and that to me is so invaluable. It is incredible, and I'm just eternally grateful. So this deck and what it symbolizes is a big part of where I'm at as a tarot snapshot. For a while, I just felt very solitary and alone, even online, even when I was reading in shops. And yeah, so I finally feel like I'm in a place where I have a network, where I have friends that, there's that. And then the final deck I have, which brings us up to the present, is this Playing Card Oracles Divination deck. I mentioned this in my recent live, in a favorites video, and my recent reads. I spoke to the books that accompany it. But this to me is more of me diversifying as a reader, as a practitioner, and I never really felt called to Marseille. I never really felt called to Lenormand or Kipper cards. And yeah, playing cards to me are suddenly clicking into place, and it's a system that I feel very strongly about. And it feels like a very seamless counterpart to my tarot practice and using tarot cards in spreads and for clients. And so this to me represents the new wave for me. This represents the new chapter and what it may hold. And I'm excited to explore that, to incorporate that into my personal and professional practice, and then see how I evolve as a reader, where that goes. And it makes me excited for the future, and that's really what is important about this specific deck. I know it's not a tarot deck, but it is crucial and pivotal and significant in terms of my tarot journey and my life as a whole. So I think that I went on quite a few rambles, and I know the first deck took up the majority of the time and what have you, but that pretty much concludes my tarot snapshots through the decks. Those are decks that I felt represented very key points in my life going forward or at various chapters. So I hope that that was interesting and fun. I really enjoyed Whiskey's original video and Lennon's response, so definitely go check theirs out. Let me know what you think, and if you're out there and you feel called to do a response, I would be very curious to watch. It feels like I'm getting to know people a lot better through this, and I hope that anybody watching this has gotten to know me a bit better through those stories and anecdotes. I hope you are all well. Like and subscribe if this was fun or interesting, and until next time, bye.